Good morning, my darlings, my angels, my loves, my he's, she's, and they's. Sunday fun day. Hello, everyone. Mother is in the house. My name is Kayse, Melone, and I'm so glad you're here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Oh, someone's camping and watching with 2 bars. LOL. Love that you're here and tuning in on this wonderful Sunday morning. We've got some interesting stuff. I want to talk about Zionism. Surprise, surprise. I have been learning a lot about Zionism recently, and a lot of the historical aspects and a lot of the religious aspects, and how it started out as a. So actually, I originally okay, well we'll get into that here in a minute. But first of all, I have a couple of announcements, a couple of fun announcements for the K-Simps, as you have called yourselves. That's a wonderful term for the fan club. Love it. So, a couple of announcements. First of all, hello, 18,000 subscribers. We are just climbing every single day. I'd love to see that. Hello, 18,000 people tuning in to the Kayse Melone show, the Kayse Melone show that is here every day on YouTube and Twitch. Good morning, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're from. I'm happy to see everyone here today. Now, I am at 18,000 subscribers on YouTube. K-Simps, yeah. I'm so grateful for all of the love and support and this community that we have built in the Kayse and Friends Discord, especially. That has been some of my favorite parts here about what's going on in the Kayse and Friends Discord. We've got the Yap Plaza. Thank you, Brian, for posting the live stream this morning. YouTube is not working for Brad. Sorry, sweetie. I wish I could, fix that for you. But here we are. So the Kayse and Friends Discord is very fun. I'm not going to announce the OnlyFans. No, that's not the announcement. You guys, I'm not going to do a fucking OnlyFans. I went down that rabbit hole. I did that when in my 20s. I'm 33 years old. I'm not going to do an OnlyFans. Like, no. Now, and that's no shade to people who do OnlyFans. Can we just not? I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that conversation. So we have 18,000 subscribers here. That's amazing. I super appreciate it. Additionally, yes, thank you for linking the Discord. No, I'm not doing an OnlyFans. Oh my goddess. Additionally, I'm going back on the Generational Change show, the live stream that they do every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Is that, yeah, I did that in my 20s. Yeah, I did. What are you talking about? It's 2025. I very much, good morning everyone listening from New York City. Good morning. Wow. Yeah, so I will be back on the Generational Change show. I will be talking a little bit more about Christian Zionism. Oh my God, stop talking about OnlyFans. Stop. Just stop. Okay, I'm gonna ignore it. Yeah, oh my God, you guys are gonna piss me off already. You guys, it is too early then complained about misogyny. Oh my God, it is too early for you guys to be annoying. Stop. Okay, just leave me alone. Yeah, exactly. Early thirst. Can we just take deep breaths? Do we need to do breathing exercises? Yeah, because I will enforce breathing exercises if you guys can't get over yourselves. Honestly, listening from Egypt, hello. Listening from Scotland, hello. Hello, all of these people. I remind you of the Atheist Republic. Yeah, I think that's a great channel. Okay, so I will be on this show on June 26th, which is a Thursday, and it will be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, the time that I'm in. Yeah, people need breathing exercises on a daily basis, apparently. Good goddess, you guys calm down. Okay. This is what's important, my goodness. Generational Change, June 26th. So I'm excited to be back on that show. Okay, can we talk about stuff that's for real now? My good goddess. Australia here. Pennsylvania. Hello, everyone. I love that everyone's tuning in from all over the place because we're talking about pretty important things. One of the things that I've been diving into is Zionism. And I saw someone say that this channel is getting, or that you think that the stuff that I'm covering is starting to get too anti-Semitic. And that is just certainly not the case, because as we talk about and cover extensively, being anti-Zionist does not equate to being anti-Semitic, okay? It's anti-ethnicity supremacy, right? Like, it's anti-Jewish supremacy. Actually, what's his name? Norm Finkelstein, I think his name is. He's done so much actual research, actual like scholarly approaches to all of this conversation and the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And he has been a leading voice in the activism against the apartheid state of Israel. And he has actually been an advocate of stopping the term Zionism and instead referring to that concept specifically as Jewish supremacy, because that's what Zionism is. It's not about talking specifically about Jewish people, okay? It's talking about the concept of Zionism, of Jewish supremacy, okay? And so in that sense, it's anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism. It is a genocide. There are many, it is not, okay, no, Israel is not doing self-defense. Israel moved in on this land where there were already hundreds of thousands of people, and they started, moving in and colonizing and settling in this land where there were already people, and they are doing an ethnic cleansing that has been widely recognized by actual reputable organizations all over the world, Amnesty International, United Nations. Like, this has been recognized by a genocide. That is what's happening. And if you don't start opening up your mind to that concept, you are going to be on the wrong side of history. I mean, you already are on the wrong side of history, but it's going to be embarrassing when in a couple decades everyone's going to be looking back and being like, "Hey, by the way, that was a genocide." Okay? And so I'm just throwing that out there. There's no room for any wiggle room on this platform, which, by the way, is my platform. So everyone needs to stop coming in here and causing me grief. I don't have my phone for my mods to update me on anything, so you guys better be good. I don't know where my phone is. My life is in shambles. Hold on. All right, fuck it. It must be in the other room. So everyone be nice, okay? Everyone be nice. All right. Oh my God. Yeah, read something in the Bible. I'm on the wrong side of history. That's hilarious. That's fucking hilarious. You guys know how much I love the Bible. You've got me fucked up. Okay. Yeah, I did see the video of children on a boat telling Greta she's on the wrong side of history. Hi, I, not to that extent, but was also a victim of childhood indoctrination, and it is one of the grossest things that we can witness here in this world. All right, can we just... Oh my God, I'm already so mad at you guys. All right. Fuck it. I'm going to get into what I want to talk about because this is my show. Hello. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the historical roots of the Zion... God damn it, let me go find my phone, you creepy, thirsty motherfuckers. Okay, y'all need to be good. I swear to goddess. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about... You think I'm anti-Western? Yeah, Western civilization is embarrassing. It is inappropriate. It is immoral. Not all the way through. I'm not talking about everyday people, but if you buy into the propaganda that Western civilization is somehow more moral or valuable, that is such an unfortunate result of the propaganda machine that is making you think that so that you can continue getting your little treats at Starbucks. Meanwhile, Western civilization is built on exploitation of other people, the global south, natural resources of this world, the Middle East. Okay, so I'm not super pro-Western in that sense. Oh my gosh, you guys, what are you talking about? I literally can't even look at the chat. You guys are losing it this morning. This happens every time I try to talk about something that matters. People can't handle it when a beautiful woman talks about important things. Okay. I wanted to talk about Zionism because I've been looking more into the historical roots of it. And I believe one time on the show, I talked about how it was originally a secular movement and then was tied into Christian Zionism later. But apparently I was wrong. Also, I was under the impression that Zionism was never tied into the religion of Judaism, and that was also incorrect. So I'm glad I've been doing a little bit more of a deep dive, because actually, really the arc, according to my understanding now, the arc of the Zionist movement actually started with a religious / secular slant, was adopted by the religion of Judaism, was then morphed into more of a secular, political, non-religious movement by so many different powers, and then eventually was adopted by Christian Zionism, making it more religious in nature, at least here in the United States, for evangelicals, while the majority, I believe now currently, the majority of Zionists who are Jewish are actually Zionists from a secular, non-religious slant. So that's what I believe. You know, there's so much context and nuance into all of that, but that's what I think is a more accurate representation of how religious Zionism is or is not. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. Thank you for the subscription. I appreciate that as well, or the membership. It is important to continue building this community. I have to be good. I'm on for a leftist streamer, so I'll get in trouble if I'm not good. Look, you and me both. I mean, I'm not a mod for a leftist streamer, but I have to be good too. In the sense that as much as these trolls are pissing me off, I'm just gonna ignore it. If I'm wrong, I regret nothing, but if I'm right, my life after I die. Kayse, what if you're wrong? Yeah, Pascal's wager. Wow, I've never heard that before. Guess what? If I'm right and you're wrong, you've wasted your life. You've wasted the one and only life you have, believing that life will be better after this life, when in reality, you could have spent your life now, the only life you have, making it better for yourself and others by being very intentional about being open-minded and allowing people to believe whatever they want and trying to improve the material conditions of everyone. If I'm right and you're wrong, you've wasted your life, the only life you have, okay? So I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so some more of the historical context of Zionism. The first Zionist Congress met in 1897 and was organized by Theodor Herzl in Switzerland. And that was like the formal launch. Zionism, like you could kind of say there was kind of like proto-Zionism before that, in the sense that the religion of Judaism did talk about, you know, Zion being reestablished, I believe specifically in the land of Israel, with a messianic or a savior figure. And one of the, and there's a lot more to it, but one of the defining splits between Jews and Christians way back when was the belief in whether or not Jesus Christ was actually that Messiah. And that's actually kind of a root of a lot of Christian antisemitism. Yeah, I said that right. Antisemitism. But Theodor Herzl is not that. That's me. Okay. Theodor Herzl was an he was, I think he lived in Vienna, Austria, a Jewish journalist and lawyer who was the father of modern political Zionism. Herzl formed the Zionist organization and promoted Jewish immigration to Palestine in an effort to form a Jewish state. And he, it was kind of, there's a lot to it because, okay, so originally Zionism was a minority movement among all the Jews whenever Herzl was trying to promote it and trying to gather some support for it amongst the Jewish populations that had been kind of dispersed all over the world through essentially a lot of different intentional displacement of them. So they were victims of displacement, in many different iterations of historical periods. But most assimilated Jews in Western Europe actually rejected Zionism according to Herzl's presentation of it originally. They were more viewing themselves as like fully German, or they were just very much assimilated already and not part of a separate Jewish nation, right? And we can imagine that there was a lot of different complexity. Whenever we're talking about any of these historical periods, it's never appropriate to say all insert demographic were like this, or, like all Jews were assimilated and not interested in a Jewish nation, or all Muslims this, or all Christians that. Like, that's never appropriate. So that keep that in mind whenever we're talking about this. But what Herzl found was that a lot of Eastern European Jews who were facing more radicalized anti-Semitism were more receptive to Zionism. And a lot of this I'm basing on this NPR podcast episode called A History of Zionism, if any of you are interested in checking that out, through NPR's podcast called Throughline. The episode is called A History of Zionism. And it talks about how an approach to Zionism among the Jewish people way back when, there was actually like two angles to it. There's like Zionism out of enthusiasm, you could almost call it, which is just this general excitement about, oh yeah, let's establish our land, our nation in our holy land. And there's also another facet of Zionism, which was like Zionism out of despair, because the Jewish people were facing so much anti-Semitism around wherever they were, but particularly it was more intense in Eastern Europe at the time of Theodor Herzl's vision. So Herzl was actually pretty assimilated in Vienna. He was a journalist, and he was doing fairly, I would say, like middle class well is one way to say that. And he witnessed the Dreyfus affair, I believe it's called, which was essentially a public anti-Semitic, what is it called? What is it called when people are in court? Trial. Oh my gosh. Trial. And a very innocent Jewish man was sentenced, I believe, to lifetime in prison, essentially because he was Jewish. And Herzl witnessed this, and there was a lot of like mass, anti-Semitic hysteria during that situation, that affair in France. And that really impacted Herzl because he considered himself, he might have considered himself more Viennese or whatever, more a part of Vienna, the city he was in, than really aligning with his Jewish identity, because that's kind of what assimilation means, right? And he talked about how he started talking about how he wanted to establish a Jewish nation. And interestingly enough, one thing that was mentioned in this podcast episode was that he kind of predicted that in 50 years from the time of when he said this, that the Jewish state would exist, and then 51 years later, after he said that in 1948, Israel was founded. So that is an interesting component there. There's been a lot of work surrounding Herzl's ideologies and the practices that he went through in order to bring about the movement of Zionism as the spiritual father of the Jewish state. And so I'm not going to get into that too much, but I will say, and what I've seen, I'm also reading 100 Years of War on Palestine. Gosh, I'm so frazzled today. I don't even know where my book is, but according to that book, Herzl was using colonial language, and it was very clear that colonizing Palestine was his intention, even if the way he talked about it was talking about gently removing the indigenous Arabs. And one thing that we've talked about before is a lot of the rhetoric of colonial movements always uses messaging along the lines of, we'll be improving and developing this land by settling here. And that's very much aligned with Herzl's views and language about Palestine, which was already inhabited by Arabs, okay? Both Muslim and Christian, and there was also, I think, like 6% a Jewish population. And the original Zionists 100% knew that. 100% knew that, right? I think that's one of the myths that a lot of modern Zionists or like, AIPAC's messaging and propaganda will try to propagate, which is that we didn't know that originally there were Palestinians here. That's a myth. That is inaccurate. Herzl actually wrote back and forth with one of the mayors of the cities in Palestine at the time, promising that no Arab will be dislodged, but also, again, was using colonial rhetoric at the same time. Zionism was seen as a like civilizing project, again reflecting colonial ideology, and that's kind of like the secular political lens of Zionism, but the way that Herzl, I think, kind of gathered support among the Eastern European Jews was through the religious lens of Judaism's belief in the Messiah and the establishment of the Holy Land, of the Jewish people in the Holy Land again, aka Palestine. Because the desire to return to Zion had been a religious hope tied to the coming of Messiah since way before Herzl was involved. And political Zionists transformed this into a secular nationalist project. And they were almost like asserting that the Jewish people didn't need to wait for divine intervention to return to the Holy Land. I think one of the differences between Judaism and Christianity is the belief that the Messiah or the Savior figure was expected, according to Jews, to be a human leader and not divine at all. Some of the other, this Savior figure would be descended from King David, which Christians claim Jesus was as well. We'll gather all of the Jews back to the land of Israel. We'll rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem, bring about all of this peace and fulfillment for everyone across the world. And so Jesus, that's why Jesus from the Jewish perspective did not fulfill any of these prophecies, and instead, because the world just remained in turmoil, right? And the temple was destroyed within just a few decades, or within a generation of his death, and most Jews remained in exile still. So because of that, there was an overwhelming understanding that Jesus was not the Messiah, because the Messiah was supposed to bring about these key things, and Jesus did not do that. So the early split between Christians and Jews was often antagonistic because that split evolved into Christianity. Again, we have to keep in mind that this happened over a period of years. This happened amongst, hundreds and thousands of people. So using any kind of just sentences, even just this is why Judaism and Christianity split into distinct religions, that sentence alone, there's so much context and there's so many layers to it that I'm not doing justice by just trying to give an overview here. So please do keep in mind that there were a lot of other facets that goes into everything I'm talking about right now. But over time, those theological disagreements were they started to be compounded. And it's one of the drivers of the early Christian persecution of the Jewish people Because according to the early Christians, and this is not the case for all Christian sects, right? But a lot of Christians, even to this day, operate under the belief that Jews had rejected or killed their Messiah. So that's one of the reasons that I argue that anti-Semitism is really baked into Christian Zionism, okay? And this was especially true in my upbringing because not only it's this kind of like warped concept of always using Genesis 12:3, which is the scripture that's always quoted by Christian Zionists. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, referring to the nation of Israel, referring to the Jewish people, I should say. Christian Zionists use that scripture all of the time. And so there's this like propping up of the Jewish people as this kind of like pawn of the end times or whatever. Meanwhile, there is this like underlying frustration. Thank you for the super chat, hashtag Kayse. There's this underlying frustration of how the Jews had killed the Christian Messiah, right? And so there's a lot of layers to the antagonism and the tension between Christianity and Judaism. Another one being that I was also preached. This is another layer of anti-Semitism in Christian Zionism. I was also preached to about how if a Jewish person never accepted Jesus as the ultimate Messiah, when they died, they would go to hell for eternity. Do you know what I mean? So like it's so fucked up. And there's a lot of layers to it that I think is a lot more nuanced than just blanket statements like, this is specifically theological or it's specifically secular or whatever. There's a lot that goes behind all of these movements throughout history. So later on, as Herzl and other leaders in the Zionist movement started secularizing Zionism, my understanding, and I'm not too familiar with Orthodox Jews and their religious beliefs, but my understanding is because it is the fact that they don't support the Zionist movement because they still believe that only the true Messiah, who has not come yet, would restore the Jewish people to their land. And so they almost see like the Zionist movement as premature or maybe even blasphemous to try and bring about the Jewish state without the Messiah. So all of that is kind of the historical context of the origination of the Zionist movement, just from a Jewish lens. And so that is what I have been looking at for a while now, and I'm still, so like all of that was still at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, almost leading up to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, on Britain's behalf, that supported a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, despite promises made to Arabs for independence, despite the fact that, Palestinians were living there, etc. Up until that point is kind of like the context, or that's kind of the context for up until 1917 in the Balfour Declaration. So I just wanted to throw all of that out because I have been looking into this more. I do think it is important to understand some of the history behind these movements, because honestly now Zionism is used in so many different ways. It's used in a lot of ways, AIPAC and Israel's propaganda machine is trying to reframe the word Zionism not as an ethno-state, right, but as a recognition of the rights of Jewish people. And that's a conflation that's intentional so that whenever people say they're anti-Zionist, it does sound anti-Semitic. But the reality is the actual ethno-state or nationalism movement is not anti-Semitic, okay? It's anti-supremacy. It's anti-racial supremacy of any level. Does that make sense? So I wanted to watch a really awesome creator, Overzealots. Overzealots is a really good creator. Oh, look, they're at almost 100,000 subscribers, so go subscribe. I linked the video that I wanted to watch with you guys. I knew that Overzealots was putting this video together because I saw it on Twitter, and I was very excited. So I thought we could watch this together. If everyone could just calm the fuck down and stop being shitty in my chat, that'd be great. Okay, let's watch this. I think, hold on, let me check the audio since that's been such a hard thing for my computer to understand. Okay.
Disclaimer, not all of the subjects in this video are equally repugnant. Some may even mean well, but just be misguided. Nonetheless, they all, in their own way, serve as illustrative examples of liberal/left Zionism. This video is simply an overarching critique of an ideology that should be rejected, not compromised with. When you hear Christian nationalists talk about America, they often say things like, we need to protect our way of life, or we can't let them outnumber us, or we need to stay separate. In the context of a country like the US, we would rightfully clock that rhetoric as right-wing, reactionary. But when we swap Christian for Jewish and America for Israel, suddenly that same rhetoric is called liberal Zionism. As historian Ilan Pappé put it,
the claim that the only way you can create a democracy in a country which has settlers and natives is if the settlers are always the majority, which is the argument of the liberal Zionists, not the right-wing Zionists. The liberal Zionists, the whole peace process is based on the idea that the only way democracy can be sustained in Palestine is if the Jews are a majority in their own homeland.
The obsession with maintaining an ethno-religious majority, the fear that demographic change means retribution, the belief that safety comes from walls and segregation. How is it that in any other country, those beliefs would get you rightfully labeled a right-wing fanatic, but in Israel, those are the talking points coming from the quote-unquote left? If you don't believe me, we could play a little game real quick. I'll show you a quote, and you have to guess if it came from a left-wing Zionist or a white supremacist. Who do you think said, "My country has the right to control the minority population's natural growth. Control of birth rates is not racism"? Was it a liberal Zionist, or was it a Klansman? Nope, I know it sounds pretty Hitlerian, but that was actually Ruth Gavison, an Israeli legal scholar and professor at Hebrew University. Like many left or liberal Zionists, she believed in the idea of a Jewish and democratic state, as if a true democracy could be reconciled with the obsessive need for a Jewish majority and the accompanying legal apparatus designed to maintain that majority. Take the 1950 Law of Return.
So again, that goes very much into the tried and true colonial rhetoric of civilizing or bringing democracy or bringing a better kind of civilization to an indigenous people, which, by the way, the people living in Palestine were keeping pace with modernization initiatives like Europe was. But you have to understand that this was a lot of the context, the historical context surrounding like the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and all of these was in the midst of the entire world reacting to and dealing with the Great War, okay, World War I. So there was a lot of fighting going on. There was a lot of displacement of all kinds of peoples going on. There was a lot of violence going on in the air. And Zionism kind of swooped in as a movement, as a settler colonial project, on top of a civilization that was already there. And, you know, there were a lot of advancements in education and transportation and natural resource, what's the word? Not consolidation, disbursement. And so there was already an entire, you know, modernizing group of people living in this land. And so the idea that the majority of these more European and westernized individuals coming in to make this land more civilized is a myth. It's totally inappropriate. Thank you for the super chat. And the "you are amazing" emoji, I think. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay.
Which states that any Jew born anywhere in the world can instantly become a member of the State of Israel. Now, contrast that with the refusal to allow Palestinians to exercise their right to return to homes and property that was stolen from them. A right affirmed by the UN, by the way, but We'll touch more on that later. Back to the game. Who do you think said, if this state is not the state of my group, and there is not within it a majority of my group, the state does not interest me? White supremacist or left-wing Zionist? Yeah, you guessed it. That was Yossi Beilin, former chair of the Meretz Party, a social democratic and secular party in Israel that merged into today's Israeli Democrat Party. One more. Who said, their natural increase has always been larger than ours. 10 years from now, 50 years from now, they'll be the majority and they'll make the decisions. And if I've got to be a minority, I'd rather not live in this region. Was that a white No, it's a left-wing it's a Zionist, left-wing Zionist and author Sami Michael. So at this point, you might be confused as to why the so-called leftist, liberal, and progressive Zionists sound identical to your average alt-right 4chan user. And that's because there's no such thing as left-wing Zionism. It's an oxymoron. I'd go as far as to say that even liberal Zionism is a contradictory term. Plenty of people in the West, especially in North America, use the terms liberal and leftist interchangeably. Although there is some overlap, they're not the same. Liberalism claims to uphold individual rights, pluralism, separation of church and state, free markets, Enlightenment principles, and so on. Ironically, many of these are values that Zionism violates in practice. Leftism, on the other hand, while definitely sharing in some of the values I just mentioned, is even more fundamentally incompatible with Zionism. It's about collective liberation, anti-colonialism, economic and political equality, justice, and solidarity across racial and national lines in the pursuit of eliminating arbitrary class distinctions. By that definition, Zionism, an exclusivist settler colonial project built on dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and supremacy, and maintained through a set of policies designed to uphold a demographic majority and subjugate the minority population, is fundamentally at odds with the left. And honestly, it takes quite a bit of slippery argumentation to force its compatibility with liberalism. So how do left or liberal Zionists make their case? Well, typically they oppose the most extreme and violent aspects of the project, things like the obviously illegal and indefensible occupation of the West Bank. They might call Israel's actions in the occupied territories apartheid, and some will rebuke the sheer brutality we see in Gaza today when it goes a little too far for their liking. But ultimately, many of these left liberal Zionists do so more to preserve Israel's image on the world stage than out of any genuine commitment to Palestinian liberation. They rarely address the systemic discrimination within Israel proper, and they continue to defend the state's founding as just and necessary, rather than a supremacist project built on ethnic cleansing and
so I actually have kind of sort of been watching the New York mayoral race, and I forget the name of the pro-Palestinian candidate, but he was asked on a news show, on a morning show, do you support Israel's right to exist? And he had a really good answer, and I should really know his name. Hold on. What's his name? I think it starts with a Z. Okay, well, I don't know. I won't waste our time. But the question, do you think Israel has a right to exist? He responded really well and said, I think that humans have a right to exist. And essentially it's this idea of, and then, the reporter asked a further question. So you don't think Jewish people have a right to their own nation? And the response, Zoran, thank you. He said something it was really brilliant. And he said, I don't believe in the idea of a hierarchy of citizenship. And that is what it means to have an ethno-state. It is that people of a certain ethnicity have more rights, have more resources, have more opportunities than other people. That is what a hierarchy of citizenship means. And that is what, anti-Zionists actually mean when we say, I don't think an ethno-state has a right to exist because that is based on the premise of ethnic supremacy. Zoran, thank you. Okay, I will remember that next time. You guys can see how, I in this conversation, I'm much more likely to do a historical deep dive, to do an ideological deep dive than keep up with the actual current events. I'm trying to have more of an eye on current events and politics, etc. but I'm always very interested in the driving underlying forces behind the manifestation of the current events of the day and age. So that's funny that I couldn't even remember his name. Okay.
And maintained through brutal domination. So for the sake of this video, when I talk about so-called left-wing Zionists, I'm including labor Zionists, liberal Zionists, and everyone else trying to slap a progressive face on a fundamentally reactionary ideology. Any self-proclaimed left-winger, liberal, progressive, or humanist who wants to take a stance on Zionism ought to be an anti-Zionist, full stop, and, in my opinion, should support what Avi Shlaim recommends: one democratic state with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of ethnicity or religion.
That is like an insane, it is so fucking insane. Oh, where'd it go?
Country, Israel should not get a pass. Reactionary ideology. Any self-proclaimed left-winger, liberal, progressive, or humanist who wants to take a stance on Zionism ought to be an anti-Zionist, full stop, and, in my opinion, should support what Avi Shlaim recommends: one democratic.
This is insane that we have to make this clear. It is insane to me that this concept is not more widely recognized as more moral and ethical than an ethno-state, than an ethnically hierarchical state. Like that sentence, one democratic state between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea with equal rights for all of its citizens, regardless of ethnicity or religion. Why is that such a difficult concept? How is that anti-Semitic? How is that anti-Arab? How is that anti-any person? It is equal rights for all its citizens. And so for people here in the United States who love the idea of democracy and equal rights for all and the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, for all of the majority of Christians who think that Israel was gifted to the Jewish people by God, I refer them to this very basic moral sentence. It is mind-blowing that we have to make this as an argument. But that is how powerful AIPAC and the propaganda machine is in all of the money it's pouring into shaping the narrative against this very reasonable moral stance. It's insane.
State with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of ethnicity or religion. We tend to like that idea when it comes to literally any other country. Israel should not get a pass. I mean, what else do you call a state whose laws are literally designed to maintain the majority of a certain ethno-religious group, if not an ethno-state? Whether they're advocating for a more humane occupation or a supposedly peaceful solution that ultimately prioritizes the preservation of Jewish demographic dominance, liberal and left Zionists alike serve the same function: to intellectualize and legitimize an ethno-religious supremacist project instead of aiming to dismantle it. They both sanitize and defend a fascist state. They serve as the intelligentsia for it and fancy themselves as reasonable alternatives to extreme right-wing Zionists like Netanyahu or Ben-Gvir.
A man called Netanyahu who's totally corrupt and incompetent.
But no matter what qualifier you put in front of the word Zionist, with the sole exception being anti, it doesn't change the fact that Zionism is an ideology built on the removal of the native Palestinian population and the replacement by settlers. Apartheid and occupation are not aberrations. They're the logical outcomes of a project that requires constant maintenance through domination. At its core, it's fundamentally genocidal, and liberal/left Zionists should not be credited as proponents of peace for trying to compromise with it.
People want that ethno-state because they have some death cult revelations shit in the back of their mind they're trying to pursue. Yes, I have covered extensively how Christian Zionism is very tied into the book of Revelation and end times and Armageddon. I think that is true for a lot of people who don't do any further research or critical thinking. But there's also there are many motivations behind Zionism that are not tied to any religion at all. For example, I think the people in power in the United States and perhaps even Israel, they don't adhere to any of the religious beliefs and just want the stronghold of quote unquote Western civilization in the Middle East. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of different motivations behind it outside of religion. But you're right in the sense that the religious motivation is pretty specific to Christian Zionism.
Let's take a quick look at the US Senator and self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist, Bernie Sanders. Don't get me wrong, he's a bit better than most Western politicians when it comes to Palestine, but he still falls strategically short of delivering a substantive critique of Zionism or the Israeli state. What do I mean by that? Bernie will give passionate speeches condemning Benjamin Netanyahu and highlighting the suffering of the Palestinian people. He'll even argue that the US should stop arming Netanyahu's government.
I think the United States should simply say tomorrow to Netanyahu, you're not getting another nickel.
But at the same time, he refuses to call what's happening in Palestine a genocide.
If Israel shouldn't exist as a Jewish nation, should there be any country that exists to serve any particular religion? As an example, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. I have critiqued religious fundamentalism and theocracies extensively, and I do not tie it specifically to, critiquing only Christian religious nations. I include Islamic religious nations in my critique of any combination of church and state. I do that extensively. However, I know that you're asking me that to paint Islam as a quote-unquote worse religion than Christianity, which I have also critiqued as a concept, because Christianity has brought about just as much harm and violence across this world through modern colonialism. It's not as peaceful as you'd like to think now, because we're still out here sending missionary trips as, framing them as humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, it's still a form of colonialism. It's still an arm of imperialism. And even just a couple hundred years ago, Europe was covered in the blood of religious violence according to Christianity. So I don't appreciate you not having that context of, by the way, there are the Ottoman Empire was originally a secular empire that was more not diverse, what's the word? Tolerant, I guess, of all different kinds of ways of worship. Okay, the Ottoman Empire is often used as this. Well, it ended up as a caliphate and was focused on unifying its population under the realm of Islam. But originally, it was uniting its population under almost like a form of proto-nationalism that was specific, just like loyalty to the Ottoman Empire. And not Islam itself. That was the origin. And again, these are single statements about a large swath of land in a large time period. So there's a lot more complexity and nuance to that. But I think that you as a Westerner have to understand that there are plenty of countries that were not originally Islamic that became Islamic, not all, but many that became Islamic as like part of the governmental concept behind these nations in response to Western imperialism. If you miss that context as to why the Islamic slant of a lot of these nations exist, you are whitewashing history. Okay, so I critique religion, all organized religions equally. However, when it comes to Islam, it is important to understand the context of the response to Western imperialism. Okay? I've talked about that extensively, so I'm going to move on in the video.
In your view, is what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide?
In my view, it is absolutely disgraceful, horrible, and I'm doing, as a United States Senator, everything I can to end it.
But do you buy the South African case at the International Court of Justice that what Israel is doing in Gaza constitutes genocide or genocidal acts?
I think, look, we can argue about definitions. It is horrible.
Despite the fact that major human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have no problem using that term. And Bernie even advised European/Western imperialism spread the, quote, good values in the name of Christian missionary has caused more harm. I agree. It has caused way more harm than good, 100%. Against a ceasefire at one point.
Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel.
He avoids naming Israel or Zionism as the root cause, choosing instead to blame only Netanyahu or the far right in Israel, as if the problem started there. Spoiler, it didn't. Plenty of liberal or left Zionists like to proclaim their disapproval of Netanyahu or the Likud party and act as though their advocacy can start and stop there.
Ethan actually voted against Bibi when he lived there, so it kind of did more than you.
This conveniently erases the fact that so-called liberal or left-wing Israeli leaders are also responsible for atrocities. From Ehud Barak's labor government killing unarmed Palestinian civilians in October of 2000, to his racist remarks about Israel being a villa in the jungle, to Yitzhak Rabin's infamous orders to break the bones of non-violent Palestinian protesters during the First Intifada, Netanyahu is not a deviation from Zionism. He is a logical outgrowth of it. Now, Bernie is a guy who's had a long career and has done a lot of good. He's made some serious mistakes as well, but I don't believe him to be malicious, and he's also nowhere near as problematic as the other figures in this video, some of which are genuinely unhinged. That said, his commendable history should not insulate him from criticism when he deserves it. The fact is, Bernie Sanders is unfortunately not an anti-Zionist, and he shares many of the shortcomings that come with liberal and left Zionism. As I mentioned earlier, liberal Zionists tend to hold on to the belief that Israel can be both a democracy and a Jewish state with an emphasis on maintaining a Jewish demographic majority, not able to understand that they hold an irreconcilable position. As I was about to upload this video, the perfect example of what I'm talking about happened to me. One of the subjects of this video responded to a tweet I made where I reiterated the fact that no state has the inalienable right to exist, and that Israel is undeniably an ethno-state because it legislates ethno-supremacy. The liberal Zionist in question replied by first admitting that he doesn't deny that Israel is an ethno-state, then spiraled into a rant about how I'm apparently a Mossad agent or something. But the only relevant part of his response is that first part. He acknowledges that Israel is an ethno-state, or at the very least, he doesn't deny it. And yet, somehow, he doesn't seem to realize that this admission raises serious questions about why he still refuses to unequivocally condemn Israel in its entirety. It's an ethno-state, isn't it? Instead, he defends it, and he even defends the act of defending it.
You could defend Israel as a, entity?
This is a perfect illustration of the contradiction liberal Zionists grapple with, trying desperately to reconcile Israel's identity as a Jewish ethno-state with its claim to being a democracy. The notion of an exclusive Jewish state is essentially incongruous with liberal democracy, in which equal citizenship rights are granted on a territorial basis to all citizens regardless of their ethnic or national origin. But in Israel, according to its self-identification and vision, it is not a state for all its citizens. Rather, it's a state for the Jewish people throughout the world. This prioritizes Jews over the million-plus indigenous Palestinians who by 2009 comprised around 20% of the state's population. Actual population, not just the ideological population. Israeli law does not recognize an Israeli nationality. Thus, while Jewish citizens are classified as having Jewish nationality, Israeli law methodically strips Palestinian citizens of their national identity and reduces them to mere ethnicity or religious affiliation. As a result, Israel is not just another nation-state in which minority communities lack some secondary rights owned by the majority. Instead, it's a settler colonial state established by the Zionist movement for advancing and expanding its colonialist project for the benefit of Jews alone. Activist and ex-Zionist Tikva Honig-Parnas wrote in her 2011 book, False Prophets of Peace, in which she takes aim at liberal and left Zionists alike and points out how by accepting the premise of Zionism and trying to make nice with it, they inadvertently legitimize and lend credence to far-right figures like Netanyahu and his coalition, who are merely a logical outcome of the ideology. She also goes on to show us how the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the colonial conquest carried out by the original Zionist settlers was done by purported left-wingers. Socialists are what they called themselves, but we'll get back to that in a bit. Honig-Parnas does not shy away from pointing out to liberals how incompatible the prospect of an exclusivist Jewish state is with liberal values. This overlapping of nation and religion runs in direct conflict with the separation of state and religion, she says. But back to Senator Sanders for now. As well-intentioned as he may be, his ideology of left Zionism often shows up as criticism of the post-1967 occupation, while still overall justifying the establishment of the State of Israel. Like many other left Zionists, He'll argue that the conditions in the occupied West Bank are unacceptable and that the settler movement has gone too far. Yet, at the same time, he fails to appropriately factor in the blatantly violent and murderous foundations of the Israeli state that led to the horrors that we see today. Just to remind you, Israel's origins involved ethnic cleansing, mass murder, and war crimes. The ideology driving this, Zionism, was described by its main founder as something colonial. A particularly funny example of this intellectual dissonance is Dalia Golem, the daughter of the founder of the Haganah, the pre-state Zionist paramilitary organization that ethnically cleansed Palestinians before the establishment of the State of Israel, and later became the IDF. Dalia, who fancies herself on the Israeli left, had this to say about the shameful post-67 occupation. My father erected the Haganah and not the occupation. The Haganah, which later became the Israeli Defense Forces, was designed to defend the land, but later became the Israeli occupation force. If my father were alive, he would be shocked to see what I see here and now. Brother, your father was an invader and a terrorist. How can you not see that his actions laid the groundwork for the occupation and are inseparable from the suffering inflicted on Palestinians today? This moral separation of the Nakba from the occupation, the desperation to make the original ethnic cleansing seem just, displays, in my opinion, either naivete or dishonesty. Some liberal Zionist figures like historian Benny Morris even go so far as to call the Nakba the...
I know, there are more trolls in my chat because there are so many reasons, but I think part of it is because my channel often talks about religion, and that makes people go fucking crazy for whatever reason. And so whenever I try to talk about things that actually manifest as a result of religion or ideological beliefs, etc., like Christian Zionism, people lose their goddamn mind. Yeah, Twitch chat is way more chill. This is one of the reasons I like Twitch. Oh my goddess. Oh my goddess. You guys are fucking insane. Can you just I'm about to enforce breathing exercises, and I don't have time to finish this video because I have to go to yoga or I'm going to lose my goddamn mind. But I did link this in the YouTube description, this video. Overzealots is a great channel. I do encourage everyone to go watch this in full and maybe learn something instead of being crazy. Oh, I have no idea what I'm talking about? Yeah, clearly you do.
Forced expulsion of Palestinians in 1948, a necessity, and have argued that Israel might actually have peace today if only all the Palestinians had been expelled in 1948. Jesus Christ, dude. Benny is still around and...
On the chat that I read, a Twitch chatter said, YouTube chat is a cesspool. And then the next chat is someone in the YouTube chat who just says, simps. You guys are so funny. You guys are so funny. Yeah, some of y'all are simps. Some of y'all are like what's like the term is like revenge simps. Like you simp after me, but you're trolls at the same time. My goddess. My goddess. You guys are insane. Ugh.
Kicking today, by the way. He's even graduated to teaming up with alleged sex pests to own his interlocutors in the marketplace of ideas. So that's cool. There are circumstances in history that justify ethnic cleansing, Morris said. A Jewish state would not have come into being without the uprooting of 700,000 Palestinians. Therefore, it was necessary to uproot them. There was no choice but to expel the population. It was necessary to cleanse the hinterland and cleanse the border areas and cleanse the main roads and the villages from which our convoys and settlements were fired on. And if that is not bad enough, his hatred is not only saved for Palestinians living in the occupied territories, but also the ones living inside the Green Line. Like I said, some liberal left Zionists love to pretend that the Palestinians within Israel proper are fully integrated into society at every level and don't face discrimination.
Segregation is not real. There's 20% of the population in Israel is Palestinian, full citizens, integrated in all levels of work and life there.
Well, here is what supposed liberal Zionist Benny Morris had to say about the that if Israel again finds itself in a situation of existential threat as in 1948, it may be forced to act as it did then. By that, he means finish the ethnic cleansing, of course. Although Benny claims to be left-wing, he looks up to fascists like Jabotinsky, who advocated for an iron wall strategy of immense brutality when dealing with the Arab population. Benny even praised Sharon's apartheid wall and argued that something like a cage has to be built for the Palestinians. It's funny because in the US, the ones calling for building the wall are far-right, and figures like Destiny hate their political views. But he has no problem being all chummy-chummy with Morris, who holds nearly identical views to the most fringe portions of MAGA. Makes no sense. This guy fancies himself as an alternative to the crazy far-right types like Netanyahu and Smotrich. He's even considered by some to be a liberal, reasonable Zionist. Just goes to show you that there's not really such a thing. This silly mentality of liberal/left Zionism is part of what causes otherwise decent people to say shit like, Israel had the right to defend itself, while it's in the middle of committing a fucking genocide.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there, because I'm gonna go to yoga. Please go watch the rest of this video. I've already learned a lot. I encourage all of you to start educating yourself if you're gonna hop into my chat and be insane. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you who I think is better, Twitch or YouTube. I might have more memberships on YouTube, but some of y'all chatters, obviously not like the people who hang out in the Kayse and Friends Discord, who are awesome, by the way. Ugh, I can't. Do you guys know? Okay, I'm gonna go on a rant because this is the Kayse Melone show before I hop off. Do you guys know how many emails I get every week? Dozens. I get dozens of emails every single week. And I understand that I'm putting myself out there and that it's part of being online, and that is like something I had to come to terms with if I wanted to do this work. And it's very important to me to show up with you guys every day. And some of you guys show up every day and are supportive and are just generally kind and introspective and intelligent people. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the troop. Keep up the good work. And that's why I show up every day. But I'm not going to lie. You know, some of the emails I get, they range from outright disgusting insults to asking me on a date, to the majority of them are what some of you guys are doing, which is telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about and I need to research this and I need to learn more about that and I need to read this article and watch this documentary. Meanwhile, what are you doing? Y'all are insane. Y'all are insane. I think I'm going to starting the stream with breathing exercises. I won't do that. I don't think I could even like calm down, but I get it. I invite this. I touch nerves. Yeah, apparently I do. But this is important. I stand by covering this information. And you know, I'm only at, as we looked at, 18,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you guys for all being here. You literally just heard me say I'm not interested in you telling me what to read. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm not looking at the chat the rest of the stream. I'm only at 18,000 subscribers on YouTube, and thank you everyone for being here. For those of you who are actually engaged and trying to better this world and participate in these conversations, thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out in the Kayse and Friends Discord. Thank you for giving more, not just supportive as like whatever I say matters, but at the very least, you know, challenging me like, well, what about this? Like if I, you know, veer off of the appropriate narrative here and there on accident or whatever. It's not that I'm like trying to create an echo chamber here, but some of you guys need to understand what it's like, what matters and what doesn't. And so it's just insane to me. So I do want to thank the people who are legitimately showing up to grow and learn together and share information with each other together. And then go about our day trying to make this a better world for everyone, right? So I appreciate all of you. I really do. And we're only at well, thank you. I do know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much. See, now you guys are being really nice. Thank you. And I think that this community is only growing, right? Like we hit 200 viewers today across both platforms, and that keeps climbing as time goes on. And I really appreciate everyone being here, even if some of y'all are simps. I love the K simps. I really do. You guys are doing great. You guys are my heroes. With that, I'm going to go to yoga and calm down and do my own breathing exercises. In the meantime, go watch the rest of this Overzealots video. Hop in the Kayse and Friends Discord. become a member on YouTube if you want to support me, or drop a super chat or drop a donation on the PayPal I have linked. I appreciate all of it. And if not, just keep showing up and we can keep talking about things that actually matter. And we'll see what we can do together and what kind of society we can build together. Thank you. Be safe, be well, make choices. Happy Sunday. I will see you guys tomorrow. Again, talking about super chill